When I arrived at my sister's engagement party, the security guard sent me to the service entrance. She didn't know I owned the hotel or that the groom's family was about to learn it the hard way. He looked me up and down before I'd even said a word. Jeans, old boots, a duffel bag still creased from the overhead bin, hair still smelling faintly of airplane recycled air. I hadn't gone home first. I'd come straight from the airport because my sister had texted me 4 times in the last hour asking where I was, and I didn't want to be the reason anything started late. Staff goes that way, he said, and pointed toward a service door tucked behind a hedge, the kind of door meant to be invisible to anyone arriving through the front. I could have said something. I could have pulled out my phone, opened the app that shows every property under my name, and watched his face rearrange itself in real time. It would have taken maybe 10 seconds. Instead, I just nodded and walked the way he pointed, because some habits don't turn off just because you'd have every right to turn them off. I've spent a long time being the person nobody looks at twice. It used to bother me. Now it's mostly just useful. My sister had spent the entire week before this, leading up to tonight, sending me messages about what to wear, who would be there, how important it was that everything looked right. She used the word particular twice when describing the groom's family, which from her was as close as she got to saying she was nervous. She wanted this to go well in a way that had very little to do with love and a lot to do with being believed. Believed as someone who belonged in rooms like the one I was about to not walk into the front of. I understood it. I didn't resent it, not exactly. I just wasn't going to be the reason the illusion cracked before she was ready for it to. So when the guard pointed at the service entrance, some old, tired part of me thought, fine, let's see how tonight actually goes before I decide whether it needs fixing. The kitchen hit me the way kitchens always do during an event like this. Heat, noise, the particular chaos of 40 people trying to plate 300 courses on a schedule that was already 15 minutes behind. Nobody looked up when I came through the door. A server thrust a folded white towel into my hands without breaking stride, said something about table 9 needing water glasses, and moved on before I could correct her. I didn't correct her. I've walked through more of my own kitchens than I can count, usually unannounced, usually dressed exactly like this, because the version of an event you get when everyone knows the owner is in the building is never the real version. You get the polished one. The one where nobody's cutting corners, nobody's cursing under their breath, nobody's quietly panicking about a menu that got changed twice in the last 2 hours. If you want to know how a place actually runs, you don't walk in the front door. You come in through here dressed like nobody, and you watch. Tonight I hadn't planned on watching my own venue. I'd planned on being a guest. But 4 minutes into the kitchen, holding a towel I didn't need, listening to 2 line cooks argue about a garnish, some old instinct in me clicked back on, and I let it, just for a little while, just to see. I set the towel down near the pass and picked up an empty serving tray instead, because a tray gets you further than a towel does. Nobody stops a person carrying a tray. Nobody asks a person carrying a tray who they are or why they're there or what business they have being in a room. A tray is a passport. I'd learned that a long time ago, back when I was the one actually working these floors, years before any of this belonged to me on paper. I pushed through the double doors into the edge of the ballroom, tray balanced, eyes down just enough to look occupied, and got my first real look at the party my sister had spent 6 months planning. It was beautiful. She'd done a genuinely beautiful job. Gold linens, low candlelight, a floral arch near the sweetheart table that must have cost more than most people's rent, string quartet in the corner, the kind of quiet, expensive music that exists specifically to make a room feel like money without anyone having to say the word. My sister knew how to build a room like this. She'd known how to build rooms like this since she was maybe 9 years old, straightening picture frames before she'd even said hello to whoever was standing in front of her. I found a spot near the edge of the room, close enough to see, far enough to stay invisible, and I watched my sister work the crowd in a dress I was certain she'd agonized over for weeks. She looked happy. She also looked like she was performing happiness slightly harder than the moment required, which is a thing I recognized because I'd watched her do it our entire lives. Somewhere in that room was the family she was marrying into. I hadn't met them yet. I was about to. Growing up, my sister and I split the household roughly, the way a lot of siblings do when one kid is easy to love in public and the other one isn't. She got the piano recitals and the matching Christmas outfits our parents could describe proudly at dinner parties. I got the version of parenting that happens when nobody's quite sure what to do with a kid who doesn't perform the way they expected, so they mostly just wait to see what you become. She was better at people than I ever was. Still is. She learned early that a room could be managed if you paid close enough attention to the right details. I never had that instinct. I had a different one. I noticed the things underneath the details, the math that didn't add up. Our parents never really asked what I did after I left home at 18. My sister had a clear, legible path. College, a respectable job, a fiancé from a family with a name people recognized. I had years of vague answers about hospitality and property that nobody ever pushed on, because pushing would have meant admitting they didn't fully understand what their younger daughter had built. I let them assume it. There's a particular kind of freedom in being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best. You get to watch instead of perform. My sister met her fiancé 3 years ago at a work conference, and from the first phone call where she described his family, I understood exactly what she was chasing. Not just him, she really did seem to love him, but the whole architecture around him, the name, the assumed permanence of old money, even when, as I'd learn later that very night, permanence was the one thing that family didn't actually have. She told me his mother came from serious people, that his father had quiet money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone in the right rooms already knew. She told me more than once that she needed this to go well, not because she doubted the relationship, because she doubted whether she'd be believed as someone someone who belonged in it. I understood that fear better than she probably realized. I'd spent years building something most people who knew me as a teenager would never guess existed, specifically because I didn't need them to believe it. She needed her future in-laws to believe it. That was the difference between us, and it was the difference that put me on the wrong side of a service entrance an hour into her engagement party. Watching her across that ballroom, tray in my hands, some instinct that had served me well in 100 other rooms told me to wait and watch and see what this family looked like when they thought nobody who mattered was paying attention. I didn't know yet how right that instinct would turn out to be. The groom's mother was easy to spot. She stood near the center of the room in cream silk, the kind of posture that comes from decades of never once being told to wait her turn. She had a way of touching things, a centerpiece, a chair back, the edge of a tablecloth that read less like admiration and more like inspection, the way someone checks a price tag without wanting to be seen checking it. I watched her intercept my sister twice in the first 20 minutes, both times under the guise of a compliment that wasn't quite one. The first was about the flowers. So unusual, I wouldn't have thought to go this direction. The second was about my sister's dress, a comment about how brave it was to choose something so simple, as if simplicity were a risk rather than a choice. My sister absorbed both without flinching, which told me she'd already had practice. I drifted closer to the edge of the dance floor, refilling water glasses nobody had asked me to refill, because it gave me a reason to exist in that space without being questioned. From there, I had a clear line to the head table, where the groom sat between his parents, looking like a man trying very hard to enjoy his own party. He seemed decent enough, nervous in the specific way people get when they're aware their family is being watched and hoping nobody embarrasses them before dinner's even served. I felt for him. It's a particular kind of exhausting managing two families at once, especially when one of them has spent your whole life teaching you that managing appearances is the same thing as loving people. The groom's father barely spoke. He nursed a glass of something amber and checked his watch twice in 10 minutes, the universal gesture of a man who would rather be anywhere else. I filed that away too. People who check their watches at their own son's engagement party are usually people whose minds are somewhere less pleasant than the room they're standing in. It was the mother who held my attention, though. She moved through that ballroom like she owned it, correcting a server's tray angle at one point, waving off a past appetizer at another, with a small, dismissive flick of her wrist that the server absorbed with the kind of practiced blankness you only develop after years of being treated like furniture. I recognized that blankness. I'd worn it myself years ago. The 22-year-old working banquets to pay for an apartment I could barely afford, learning the hard way which guests tipped, and which ones simply believed tipping was beneath people like them. 20 minutes in, I watched the mother pull a floor manager aside off to one side of the room. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read the shape of it easily. Her leaning in, jaw tight, gesturing toward the champagne station with visible displeasure, him nodding, apologizing, already halfway into the posture staff adopt when they know a complaint is coming whether or not it's earned. I drifted closer, refilling a glass at the next table over, close enough now to catch fragments. Wrong shade entirely, this isn't what we discussed. I can absolutely have that corrected, ma'am. I apologize for the— It's not an apology I need, it's competence. The floor manager's face didn't change, but I saw his shoulders drop half an inch, the small physical toll of being spoken to like that in front of a room full of people pretending not to notice. My sister was maybe 15 feet away, close enough to hear, and I watched her step in before the manager had to say anything else. I think it looks lovely, my sister said, her voice bright in that specific way she gets when she's trying to smooth something over before it becomes a bigger thing. Really, it's perfect. The mother turned to her slowly, and for just a second, barely a second, gone before most people would have caught it, something flickered across her face that wasn't quite a smile, more like the recognition of an opening. You're sweet to say so, she said, though I do think it's important, especially now, that we hold things to a certain standard. Don't you agree? My sister said yes. Of course she said yes. She'd been saying yes to versions of that sentence her entire life, just from different people in different rooms. I stayed where I was, glass in hand, and felt something old and familiar settle into my chest. Not quite anger yet, more like recognition. I'd seen this particular shape of cruelty before, dressed up as standards, delivered with a smile so nobody in the room could quite call it what it was. I didn't intervene. Not yet. I told myself I was still gathering information, still deciding what tonight actually was before I decided what to do about it. That was mostly true. But if I'm honest, some part of me also just wanted to see how far it would go, because I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I let anyone know I was in the room at all. The younger brother found me near the bar about half an hour later. I'd set my tray down to actually get a drink, which in hindsight was probably the mistake that made me visible in the wrong way. He was maybe 24, dressed expensively in a way that read more like inheritance than taste, with the specific swagger of a man who'd never once had to wonder whether a room would make space for him. You working tonight? He asked, looking me over the same way the security guard had, except with a different kind of interest behind it. Something like that, I said, which wasn't a lie, technically. He grinned like I'd said something funny and pulled a folded bill from his jacket pocket, sliding it across the bar toward me with 2 fingers. Casual, like he did this often enough that it had stopped requiring thought. If you're not too busy later, I could use somebody to bring a bottle up to the suite. No rush. I looked at the bill. I looked at him. I didn't take either. I'm good, I said. He laughed short and a little too loud, and leaned back against the bar like my answer had confirmed something he already believed about the world. Suit yourself, he said, and then to the friend standing next to him, not quite quiet enough. These staff girls get so sensitive. I felt it land the way these things always land. Not a wound exactly, more a small, precise reminder of how easily some people decide what you are based on what you're wearing and where you're standing. I've had 30 years of practice not reacting to that particular reminder. I picked my tray back up and walked away. By the time I made it back toward the kitchen, the floor manager who'd taken the champagne complaint earlier caught my eye near the service hall. He knew who I was. I'd been in this building 100 times, always dressed like this, always watching. His face did a small, complicated thing when he saw me, somewhere between relief and alarm. I shook my head once, small, just for him, not yet. He nodded and disappeared back into the noise of the kitchen, and I stood there for a second in the hallway between two worlds, the one where I was nobody and the one where I owned every square foot of the building we were standing in. And I thought about how strange it was that both of those things could be true at exactly the same time, and nobody in that ballroom had any idea which version of me they were looking at. I decided, standing there, that I'd let the night keep unfolding a little longer before I chose. I wanted to see the shape of this family fully before I decided which version of myself they were going to meet. Dinner service went smoothly enough, at least from where I stood. I'd drifted back into a semi-official role by then, half carrying trays out of genuine habit, half using it as cover to stay close to the head table without drawing attention. Once you're in the uniform of invisibility, people stop looking at you as a person and start looking at you as a function, and functions don't get interrogated. I watched my sister relax slightly as the meal went on, the way she does when a room finally starts behaving the way she planned it to. She laughed at something the groom said. He reached over and took her hand at one point, just briefly, and the sincerity of it was hard to miss even from 30 feet away. Whatever else was true about this family, I didn't doubt for a second that he loved her. Toast started a little after 9, once the plates had been cleared and the lighting had dropped low enough to signal the shift from dinner to celebration. The groom's father went first, and it was exactly what I expected. Brief, generic, a few lines about welcoming a wonderful addition to the family that could have been lifted from a template. He sat back down within 90 seconds, visibly relieved to have the obligation behind him. Then the mother stood. She held her champagne glass with both hands, the way people do when they want a moment to feel more significant than it actually is, and let the room settle into silence before she spoke. She had good instincts for that kind of thing. I'll give her that. She knew how to hold a room even when she didn't own it. I just want to say, she began, how thrilled we are to welcome someone so wonderful into our family. A polite ripple of approval moved through the tables. My sister's smile brightened, relieved, the particular relief of someone who's been braced for something worse and hasn't gotten it yet. It hasn't always been easy, the mother continued, blending two very different worlds. But I do think with the right guidance, anyone can learn to fit in beautifully. The ripple thinned out slightly. A few guests exchanged glances. My sister's smile held, but I saw the exact moment it stopped being automatic and became effortful instead, a held expression rather than a felt one. I hope, the mother went on, her voice pleasant, almost warm, that you'll grow into the kind of woman this family expects. I have every confidence you will. She paused, just long enough for the sentence to seem finished, then added, almost as an afterthought, glancing briefly, deliberately, toward the edge of the room where I was standing with my tray, and I do hope you'll learn to keep better company than whoever that girl carrying trays around all night has been. Standards matter, even in the small things. The room laughed. Not everyone, not even most people if I'm being precise about it, but enough. Enough that it counted as a real laugh. The kind that costs something. The kind that tells you exactly how many people in a room are willing to let cruelty pass as wit if it's delivered with the right smile. My sister's face didn't crumble. She's better than that. Better than I sometimes give her credit for. But I watched something in her eyes go somewhere else entirely. Somewhere private and hurt, even as her mouth kept its shape. She glanced toward me, just once, quick, apologetic in a way that made my chest ache more than the comment itself had, and then looked back at the room she was supposed to be charming. I set my tray down on the nearest surface, quietly, and for a moment I let myself consider walking straight to the front of that room and ending the illusion right there. I had every right to. Watching my sister absorb a public insult on my behalf, delivered with a smile, while a room full of guests laughed along with it, was exactly the kind of moment that would have justified it. But something held me back. This was a comment. Ugly? Yes. Cruel? Yes. But small, in the scheme of what I was starting to suspect might be happening underneath the surface of this family's polish. I wanted the real thing, not just the satisfaction of a single public correction. So I turned instead and started walking toward the service exit, tray abandoned, done watching for the night. I told myself I'd handle it tomorrow, quietly, review the account, maybe have a private word with my sister. I was, in that moment, choosing mercy. I didn't get more than 15 feet before that choice was taken out of my hands entirely. Ms. Lane, the general manager's voice cut through the ambient noise of the room, sharp enough that several nearby heads turned, not because he'd said it loudly, but because of who he was, and the particular urgency in his tone. He crossed the floor toward me with a leather folder tucked under one arm, and for a second I thought, that whatever this was would be small enough to handle quietly. I need your sign-off before the caterer releases the next course, he said, low enough now that only I could hear it clearly, though the damage of him saying my name at all was already done. The account's showing a payment hold. Deposit card was declined twice this afternoon, and the backup contact hasn't returned any of our calls. I felt the floor tilt slightly under that sentence, though not in a way anyone watching would have noticed. Cards get declined, backup contacts go unanswered. Event accounts run into hiccups more often than most guests would ever guess. But it was information, and information has a way of reorganizing everything around it once it lands. Which account? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The Whitfield account, he said, covering tonight in full. Whitfield, the groom's family name. Not my sister's account, not some shared arrangement, theirs. The old money family who'd spent the last 2 hours performing wealth loudly enough to insult a woman carrying a water tray and whose card had bounced twice that same afternoon. I paused a moment longer than I needed to, letting that fact settle into place next to everything else I'd watched over the last 2 hours. The mother's inspection of every centerpiece like she was pricing rather than admiring, the father's watch checking, the performance of standards from people who apparently couldn't currently afford the party they were performing them at. Hold the next course exactly where it is, I told the general manager quietly. Don't say anything to anyone yet. Bring the account file to the side office. I want to see everything before we do anything else. He nodded, already turning, and I watched him disappear back through the same door I'd walked out of an hour earlier as a nobody carrying a tray. I stood in that hallway between the ballroom and the kitchen for a long moment, watching the whole night rearrange itself into something else entirely. I glanced back once through the door's small window before it swung shut. My sister was still standing near the head table, composing herself, doing the work of looking fine that she's always done better than anyone else I know. The groom's mother had already moved on to another conversation entirely, laughing at something, glass in hand, utterly unaware that a hold had just been placed on the account paying for the party she was currently commanding. She had no idea yet what she'd actually walked into tonight. Neither did I, not fully, but I was about to find out, and so was she. The side office was quiet in the specific way that only makes sense once you've spent enough time inside a building loud enough to need somewhere to escape it. Thick carpet, low light, the ambient hum of the ballroom reduced to almost nothing once the door clicked shut behind me. The general manager had the account pulled up by the time I got there, laptop angled so I could see the screen without either of us needing to lean over the desk. He didn't say much. He knows better than to editorialize before I've had a chance to look at the numbers myself. The Whitfield account showed exactly what he'd described. 2 declined charges on the primary deposit card that afternoon, both flagged for insufficient funds, both resubmitted within the hour on what turned out to be a secondary card, this one clearing without issue. A minor inconsistency on its own. People juggle cards all the time. It wasn't proof of anything yet. It was just a loose thread. Anything else flagged? I asked. He hesitated, which told me there was. There's a note from finance, he said, from 2 weeks ago. A deposit on the initial booking bounced, got resubmitted a few days later. Cleared fine. Nobody thought much of it at the time, but given what happened this afternoon, I pulled the history just now, and there's a pattern of near misses going back almost a month. Nothing that ever actually failed to clear eventually, but close, every time. I sat with that for a moment. A month of near misses is not by itself a scandal. Families with genuine old money mismanage cash flow more often than anyone would guess, usually because the money is tied up in things that aren't liquid. It didn't necessarily mean anything sinister. I had the general manager place a soft hold. Nothing visible to the guests. Nothing that would embarrass anyone unnecessarily, just enough that the next course wouldn't go out until the account showed a clean charge. I told him I'd handle the rest quietly, privately, probably tomorrow, with a phone call rather than a scene. That was the plan. For about 11 minutes, that was genuinely the plan. I stepped back out into the hallway between the office and the ballroom, intending to find my sister, pull her aside somewhere private, and tell her enough of the truth to prepare her without turning her own engagement party into an audit. I found her near the catering station instead, pretending to check on a tray of desserts that didn't need checking. "I'm so sorry," she said, before I'd even fully reached her. About what she said. I should have said something right then. It's fine, I told her, and meant it enough for that moment. I need you to trust me on something for the next hour. Can you do that? She looked at me carefully, the way she does when she's trying to figure out which version of me she's talking to. What's going on? There's an issue with the account covering tonight, I said, keeping my voice low. I don't know how big yet. I'm going to find out quietly without making a scene, and I need you to just keep smiling and let the party keep going while I do that. Her face went through several things in quick succession. Confusion, then alarm, then a kind of resigned understanding. Okay, she said. I trust you. I told her I'd tell her everything after, and I meant that too. I went back into the side office believing, honestly, that the story mostly ended there. A quiet card issue, resolved quietly. A private conversation with my sister afterward about what she was walking into. I thought I already understood the shape of what I was dealing with. I did not. The general manager had told the fuller financial history by the time I sat back down, and within the first minute of looking at it, the shape of the evening changed entirely. It wasn't a family running temporarily thin on liquid cash. It was something more deliberate than that. The secondary card that had cleared the afternoon's decline charges wasn't a backup account belonging to the Whitfield family at all. It was registered under a different name entirely, tied to an address 3 states away. The deposit from 2 weeks earlier that had bounced and cleared had actually bounced, been quietly resubmitted under that same secondary name, and cleared using funds that, according to a flagged note from our finance team, had been the subject of an internal review just that morning for a mismatched billing address. None of that, on its own, was necessarily criminal. There were a dozen innocent explanations I could have reached for, and I genuinely tried for a moment to reach for one. But then I found the wire transfer. Flagged that same morning, sitting in a queue for manual review because the routing information didn't match anything on file for the Whitfield account. A transfer initiated the day before, for an amount just under the reporting threshold that would have triggered additional scrutiny automatically, sent from an account under yet another name, this one belonging, according to a quick search the general manager ran while I watched, to a small property holding company registered less than 6 months earlier. I sat back in my chair and looked at the pieces laid out in front of me, and understood, with the specific clarity that comes from finally seeing a shape you'd been circling without naming, that I wasn't looking at a family temporarily short on cash. I was looking at a family in the middle of hiding something clothing, using an engagement party as cover, betting that nobody would look closely enough at an account this size on a night this celebratory to notice the seams. I thought about the mother's comment from the podium less than an hour earlier. Standards matter, even in the small things. I thought about her inspecting the centerpieces like she was pricing them. I thought about the father checking his watch. I asked the general manager to pull everything, every transaction on file, every name attached to the account in any capacity, going back as far as our system allowed. He nodded and got to work without asking why, which is one of the reasons I trust him with things like this. While he worked, I sat there and thought about my sister on the other side of that wall, standing in a dress she'd agonized over, believing she was marrying into a quiet, permanent kind of security that this family's own account history was actively contradicting in real time. I thought about how close I'd come to letting this stay small, private, handled with a phone call tomorrow instead of the reckoning it was clearly about to require tonight. Whatever I'd been prepared to do quietly, out of mercy, out of not wanting to embarrass anyone unnecessarily on what was supposed to be a happy night, that plan didn't survive the account sitting open in front of me now. This was one of those things that don't stay small once you actually look at them closely enough, and I was the only person in that building who currently understood exactly how large it had already become. The general manager worked in silence for the better part of 20 minutes while I sat across from him, watching a picture assemble itself one flagged transaction at a time. I've read enough of these account histories to know how to read the difference between an honest mess and a deliberate one. Honest messes have a kind of randomness to them. What I was looking at had a pattern. Every irregularity traced back eventually to the same small handful of names, the same handful of accounts, moving money in amounts calculated specifically to avoid the kind of attention that would have caught this sooner. The property holding company, the general manager said eventually, turning the laptop so I could see it clearly. Registered 5 months ago. Single officer listed. Same name as the secondary card that cleared this afternoon's charges. Whose name? I asked. He read it out. It wasn't the mother's name, and it wasn't the father's either. It took me a second to place it, and when I did, something cold settled into my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the younger brother's name, the one who'd slid a folded bill toward me at the bar an hour earlier, grinning, certain of exactly what kind of person he thought I was. Pull everything on that entity, I said. Everything you can legally access on our end. I want to know what else it's connected to. It took another 10 minutes, and what came back painted a picture uglier than I'd expected, though by that point, I probably should have stopped being surprised by anything this family produced. The holding company had been used, over its brief 5-month existence, to move money through at least 3 other accounts, each transaction structured just under whatever threshold would have triggered mandatory reporting, small amounts individually, substantial once you added them together, and every single one of them traced back, eventually, to accounts connected to the Whitfield family's primary estate holdings, the same estate my sister had described to me months ago, in the exact reverent tone people use when they believe they're marrying into permanence. I thought about the timeline. 5 months since the holding company's registration, roughly the same window, according to the general manager's earlier notes, since the near misses in the Whitfield event account had started appearing. Almost exactly the same window, I realized with a jolt, since my sister had told me the wedding date had been moved up, suddenly, from what she'd originally planned 18 months out to something closer to 6. I didn't know yet exactly what all of this added up to. Fraud, certainly of some kind. The structuring alone was enough to warrant serious concern. But the shape of it, the timing of it, the fact that a family who'd spent an entire evening announcing their standards loudly enough to publicly humiliate a woman for standing near the wrong tray was simultaneously moving money through a shell entity registered by their own son. That shape told a story I didn't like at all. It told a story where an engagement, and possibly the wedding that would follow it, wasn't just a celebration of love, however real that love might have been between the two people actually getting married. It was cover, a believable celebratory reason for large sums of money to be moving around a family's accounts without anyone asking too many questions. Do we have enough to be certain? I asked the general manager, more to myself than to him. Enough to be concerned, he said carefully. Not enough on what we can see from our end alone to say for certain what it's for. That would need actual forensic accounting, probably outside counsel. What we have is enough to know this account should not be trusted to cover the rest of tonight, and enough that I'd want our compliance team looped in first thing tomorrow regardless of anything else that happens tonight. I let that settle for a moment. He was right, and I appreciated him being right rather than letting the tension of the evening push either of us into overstating what we actually knew. But I also knew, sitting there, that I had more than enough to stop pretending tonight was still just a party I happened to own the building for. I thought about my sister for a long moment before I did anything else. She was still out there doing the specific work of holding a room together that she's always been better at than anyone else I know. She didn't know yet that the family standing all around her had spent the last 5 months quietly funneling money through a shell company registered by her future brother-in-law. She didn't know that the mother who'd just publicly humiliated a woman carrying trays was standing in a room paid for, in part by transactions our compliance team was going to flag as structuring the moment anyone with the right access looked closely enough. Part of me wanted to walk out there right then and pull her aside, tell her everything before anyone else found out. But I also knew, from years of watching situations like this unfold in exactly the wrong order, that quiet corrections rarely stay quiet when the people involved have spent an entire evening performing untouchability. If I pulled the mother aside privately, gave her the chance to handle this discreetly, I had no doubt she'd find a way to spin it, minimize it, make it my sister's family's fault somehow. I'd watched her do smaller versions of that exact maneuver all night. I wasn't going to let her do it with this. The general manager was watching me, waiting, the folder now considerably thicker than the one he'd carried out onto the ballroom floor an hour earlier. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about the security guard who'd sent me around back without a second glance. I thought about the younger brother's folded bill and his comment to his friend about how sensitive staff girls could be. I thought about the smile on the mother's face as she delivered a public insult dressed up as a toast, and about my sister's face in the half-second before she recovered it. That flash of real hurt she'd tried so hard not to let the room see. "We do it in front of everyone," I said, quietly enough that it's not a spectacle for its own sake, but clearly enough that nobody in that room walks out tonight confused about what happened or why. He nodded, closed the folder, and stood. I stood with him, and for a moment, before we headed back out into the noise, I let myself feel the specific, steady clarity that comes right before you do something you know is right, even though you also know it's going to hurt someone you love on the way there. My sister was about to learn something about the family she was marrying into. I was about to make sure she learned it from me, on my terms, in a room I controlled completely, rather than finding it out in pieces over the years the way so many people do, always too late to have changed anything. We walked back out into the ballroom together, the general manager a half step behind me, folder in hand. The band was between songs. Conversation had picked back up in the wake of the toast, the specific low murmur of a room that's decided to move past something uncomfortable by simply talking louder about something else. The groom's mother was near the dance floor, mid-laugh at something a guest had said, glass in hand, utterly at ease. I let the general manager walk ahead of me, close the last distance between us and the small cluster around her, and I watched his face settle into the particular calm he uses when he's about to say something that's going to matter. "Ms. Lane," he said, clearly this time, loud enough that the nearest tables turned. "We need your sign-off before the toast continue." The room did that thing rooms do when they realize, all at once, that they misjudged someone badly. Conversation didn't stop so much as collapse inward, dozens of separate exchanges folding into a single held breath. The mother's laugh cut off mid-note. My sister, across the room near the head table, went completely still, then found my eyes and mouthed a single word. "Owned." I didn't smile. There wasn't anything to smile about yet, not really, just the beginning of something that needed finishing properly. "I'm sorry," the mother said, recovering fast, the way people like her always do. "I don't think we've been introduced." "We haven't," I said. "I own this hotel." I let that sit in the room for a second before I said anything else. I watched it land on different faces differently. The groom's slow blink of confusion shifting toward alarm, the father's watch-checking hand going still, the younger brother near the bar going visibly pale, understanding exactly what this meant before anyone had explained it to him. "There's a hold on the Whitfield account," I continued, keeping my voice level, conversational, the tone I'd use to deliver any piece of information rather than a weapon. 2 declined charges this afternoon. A pattern of near misses going back nearly a month, and a wire transfer flagged this morning, structured just under the threshold that would have triggered automatic review, routed through a property holding company registered 5 months ago under your son's name. The mother's face didn't move for a long moment, then it did, all at once, the practiced composure cracking into something rawer and far less rehearsed. "This is absurd," she said. "This is a private family matter, and you have no right." "I have every right," I said. "It's my building, my staff, my account records showing structuring patterns that our compliance team is required to report regardless of what happens here tonight." "You're mistaken," she said, though her voice had lost its earlier certainty, gone thin at the edges. "Whatever you think you found, I'd be happy to be wrong," I said. "I'd genuinely prefer it, but I don't think I am, and I think you know that better than anyone standing in this room right now." The younger brother had gone very quiet near the bar. I watched him set his drink down slowly, the way people do when they're trying not to draw attention to the fact that their hands have started shaking. The groom stepped forward then, and I felt the whole room's attention shift toward him, waiting to see which direction he'd move. "Mom," he said, quiet, almost pleading. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing," the mother said quickly. "Nothing, sweetheart. It's a misunderstanding. We'll sort it out tomorrow." "It's not nothing if it's true," the general manager said, and I saw the mother's eyes cut toward him with a sharpness that told me she'd clocked correctly that he wasn't going to be talked out of what he already knew. I looked at the groom directly. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," I said, and I meant it. "I'm telling you because you're marrying into this family in 6 months, and you deserve to know what you're marrying into before you do." He looked in that moment like a man watching the floor of his own life shift under him in real time. "Is it true?" he asked, turning to his mother, and something in his voice had gone very young, very small. She didn't answer. That, more than anything I'd said, was the answer. My sister crossed the room then and came to stand beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. She didn't say anything either. She didn't need to. For the first time all night, nobody in that room was watching her manage anyone's expectations but her own, and I could feel, even without looking at her directly, how strange and unfamiliar that stillness was for her. The mother's composure finished cracking all at once, the way a held breath finally releases. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said, though it wasn't clear anymore whether she was talking to me or to her son or to the room in general. "You have no idea what this could cost this family." "I have a very good idea," I said. "I've spent the last hour looking at exactly what it's already cost. I just don't think you were the one who was going to pay it. I think you were counting on my sister's family to absorb that instead, quietly, the way people like you usually count on people like us to absorb things." Nobody in that room laughed this time. Nobody needed to. The father finally spoke, his voice low, defeated in a way that told me he'd known about at least part of this long before tonight. "We should go," he said to his his wife, and there was no fight left in it, just exhaustion. She looked at him like she wanted to argue and found, finally, that she didn't have anything left to argue with. The younger brother had already started moving toward the exit, phone in hand, not looking at anyone. The mother turned back to me one last time, and whatever she'd meant to say died somewhere between her chest and her mouth. She turned instead, gathered whatever remained of her composure into something that could pass, from a distance, for dignity, and walked toward the doors without another word. Her husband followed a few steps behind her. The groom stood alone in the middle of the room, watching his parents leave, and then he turned to my sister. I watched him take her hands in both of his, watched him say something too quiet for me to hear from where I stood, watched her nod, and then watched the two of them simply stand there together, foreheads nearly touching, in the wreckage of a party that had started as a celebration and ended as something closer to a verdict. The band, uncertain what else to do, started playing again, something slow and instrumental that nobody danced to. I stood at the edge of it all, my sister's earlier words still sitting somewhere in my chest, mouthed silently across a room that had no idea, until 4 minutes ago, what that word was actually going to mean by the end of the night. And I watched the two people who actually loved each other stand quietly together in the middle of everything their families had built and broken around them, and I didn't move to join them yet. Some moments aren't meant to be interrupted, even by the people who made them possible.